Hello, and welcome to another sociologist setting the standards for studying the social network system. Uncle Gary started seeing a therapist after he cussed out an elderly woman at Walmart episode of Thedaysgrimm. My name is Thomas Grimm.
And I'm Drew Head.
How are you?
I'm not bad. It's a little weird having you do the intro.
I know. Brian's MIA. I think he got a call from the military. He re-enlisted, went dark for a weekend. I think that's what happened there. Joining us this week in the Thedaysgrimm studio, though, is Andy Buck. How are you?
I'm great. I'm doing excellent. Nice to be here in the new year, and I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Oh, we're honored to have you. Drew told us about you, and I was like, we have to get this guy into the studio. I guess for our listeners that don't know, Drew attended one of your classes.
Yeah, I've had a couple of classes of yours, and I didn't hate any of them. So that's
coming from a college kid. That's props.
That's good. Those are good.
Yeah, I thought they were super interesting.
Do you want to tell our listeners a brief synopsis, like almost like an elevator pitch of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am a professor of sociology, and I teach at University of Southern Indiana. I'm the chair of the department, and I spend most of my time, lecturing and running the department and writing. And those are my sort of main activities, writing sociology.
And so sociology is just, it's social science, right?
Yeah.
So is the elementary school version of that social studies? Because it's like the studying of
It's
culture.
close. It's close. I mean, sociology, I like to say that the difference between, what's the difference between psychology and sociology? Like most people know psychology, and psychology is the study of the individual, and sociology is the study of the group. And so your race, your class, gender, institutions like education, social networks, things like that.
Do you think we have a choice nowadays? That's one thing that right. I've learned from looking into it this week is some people in this field believe that you technically really it's more of a herd choice than a personal choice.
I feel like some of those we do have choice, right? I believe, and I think most sociologists would say that we have choice is something that is part of our lives. It's just not the strong point for sociology, right? So sociology, we kind of focus more on how the context influences people and influences your choices. And, psychology, economics, they're more about the individual making choices, which is great. It's easy to kind of, make it a kind of a false dichotomy, like it's either the individual or the group. And, just in sociology, we're just more focused on the group. That's just more of what we're about. And like I said, if you want to get, the individual, that you can go to economics for that. And they have a lot of really interesting things about how people make choices and stuff.
So it's a pretty broad field, would you say?
It's a big field. Yeah. It's like Noah's Ark. And that's what I like about it, is that it's very much like I've been able to study all different kinds of things during my career as a sociologist.
And it's taken you all over the world.
It's taken me all over the world, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And it's also a field that, because it's so big and broad, one of the cool things about sociology is that we find things that matter. I mean to say that a lot of times in the social sciences, people, find relationships like, if you delay eating the chocolate, before you, do your work, or after you do your work, you're going to have a certain kind of personality, those kinds of things. Those kinds of studies aren't very replicable. Like people can't find them again and again. It's like they did it once, and then they try to find it again, and it's like it didn't work.
Because each individual is different.
Each individual is different. Whereas with sociology, we've been able to you find again and again that you're
socioeconomic. On average, maybe this year 100 people kill themselves. Next year, about 100 people will do the same. or
right. Or that like your socioeconomic status is going to influence your health, something like that. And you're going to say, yeah, that probably is true. And so that's what's nice about sociology is that we study things that are, pretty important. And sometimes people are like, oh, well, we already know that. We already know that socioeconomic class background or racial background, racial background influences your life, but it bears repeating.
Yeah, it's also like, how do we know that? Because people have studied it before.
Right.
Like, you didn't just like, you weren't born knowing that. Someone studied it, and that's why you know that.
Right. Exactly.
It's definitely interesting to think about too. And you think about like the La Biblioteca, the library that they burned down, and like all the knowledge lost in that. Like, I wonder how much of like
where was this that they?
Was it the Library of Alexandria?
Oh, really?
Yeah, not La Biblioteca.
That's library in Spanish.
Yeah.
Right.
But no, the Library of Alexandria, where they burned like all the Egyptian, basically like their library full of knowledge back in the early days.
Right.
I don't know anything about that, so I'm going to take your word for it.
You look it up real fast. The dude, like Library of Alexandria burning. Yeah. Right. It was in the medieval times. I think it was when the Ottomans overthrew.
Right.
I don't know.
But I wonder like why they would do that, other than to rewrite history, of course.
Right.
Is that part of like, does that go into it at all? Like when the conquerors of a nation go through and rewrite history, is that involved in sociology?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, there's historical sociology that people study, and they look into how power, influences knowledge, and how people can use their position. And actually, that's one thing that I do study. I study elites, so that was one of the main things that I study is elites and how elites can.
Does it scare you with the modern way the world's kind of headed and like an elite in a way?
Well, we
don't talk to politics too much, but
right.
I feel like there is a puppet hand of sorts.
Well, there's one way to look at it. Like, is it getting worse? There's always been an elite. You know what I mean? Like that's always been. It's sort of a sociological truth. Like there's always a small group of people who are
working for a larger group.
or in charge, but it becomes interesting if, you're trying to become democratic, or is it a democracy? Those are the sort of the issues that people have. But, and certainly elites, I studied the people who ran the Soviet Union, like what happened to them after the fall? What did they end up doing? Putin is one of those people. He was part of the
regime,
the old regime, and then he wanted to reinstitute it. And then I've also looked at like the British, people who run corporations,
which is crazy because it was a little bitty island and it conquered how much of the world,
right? And the royal, Sir Elton John and all the titles and
right.
And so we definitely do study, how power can influence knowledge.
Were you born in Indiana? I'm sorry, I kind of excited.
No. I was born in I was born in Palo Alto, California.
Wow.
Yeah, my dad was a professor, so he is a historian of China, and then he got a job in Milwaukee. And so I grew up pretty much in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
It's cold there.
It is cold there. I like the cold.
So growing up, did you get like a taste for history and like that from your dad? You think your want for knowledge and like where things come from, how things are?
Yeah, the funny thing is, my dad was never really he never really talked about history that much, at home. But you know how it is. Like I kind of watched him, and at one point when I was like 18, he told me, he was like, Andy, I want you to become you should go into Chinese studies, just like your dad. Your name, people will know you, your name, and I decided, I was like, no, I'm not going to. I didn't go that far. The fruit did not fall far from the tree, but
ended up. So you grew up in Milwaukee, and then how long did you live there?
So I lived there my whole, basically, like
until
my parents
college?
lived. They moved to Milwaukee when I was 1, and then I grew up in Milwaukee. I went to a Catholic, all boys Catholic high school, Marquette, which was a great school. I loved it. And then I went to college at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. So I was pretty much, I'm still a Badger,
Yeah.
I mean, my son is a Hoosier, like he's 16. He grew up in Evansville.
Right.
He's a Hoosier, and but I'm a Badger still.
Yeah. So how do you go from growing up in Wisconsin, being a Badger, to living in Russia and the UK and
so going to Russia they had an exchange program at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and we were like the first cohort of students to go to the Soviet Union. So I'm so old.
So it's still the Soviet Union.
It was
at the
still
time.
the Soviet Union. Yeah.
And so in school, were you practicing like the bomb? Were you in that time zone where you had to practice like bomb drills?
Yeah, we were like, yes, definitely.
Did you have to know how to speak any Russian to go over there?
Yeah, so I took Russian. So I took Russian when I was when I entered college, and it was like at the time the fall of the Berlin Wall, so there was all kinds of interest in Russia at the time. So like 87 is when I entered. So at that time, it was like the Cold War. Everything was Russia. There were all these like movies and television shows about the Ruskies, and they're going to come. And
that was when that one crazy guy in chess was playing chess during the Cold War. Dude, anything in the Cold War, any type of sporting or mental activity that was like U.S. versus Russia became like a blown up worldwide affair. And there was this chess player, that like they like went all crazy, and he went crazy. Like he took apart his hotel room, thinking that they were like listening into like his room plays and stuff, like his ideas. Like it's wild. But then like, so when you go to Russia, do they have like chaperones with you guys while you're in Russia?
Well, yeah, we pretty much did. Now that I think about it, they didn't present themselves that way. They kind of presented themselves as like, hey, we're here to help you out.
Yeah, like you're in a foreign country where you might not be completely fluent in the language. You probably have like professors there.
Right.
They
were actually students. They were students.
Students.
Okay.
So the students would be like, hey, like let's, I'll help you out. And they were, they did. And they
Are they students like from Russia?
Yeah, from Russian students that, their dad might be working for, some government agent. And they're like, hey, we can get Vlad to do this, and he'll, come along. And so we definitely had that. It was eye-opening because there was people there were a couple of times when I was there, a couple of days where I literally couldn't find any food. There was a shortage economy at the time, and people would stand in line
because the union was collapsing at that time.
Yeah, it was completely in a I was there like 4 or 5 months before it fell.
Wow.
And so the place was in shambles.
And so like when you get over there, do you see like the play of propaganda, like versus here in the US versus like there in Soviet Russia at the time? Like you're getting both sides basically of the news, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it was the propaganda there at that time. Like they had a May Day parade, which is like a big socialist, like communist holiday, May Day. And no one showed up for, there are very few people who showed up for it.
And now it's a band.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Wait, there's a band?
Yeah, there's a band called Mayday Parade.
Really?
I think they're like pop punk emo.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they are.
That's hilarious. That's a good name.
Yeah. That's
never
I
heard
was
the band.
the whole time I was like that. I did not know that was like an actual thing. I just
It's
knew
a
of the
big
band.
thing there.
So I guess we kind of got distracted here.
Yeah.
We'd like to do this
Little
tasty little bit called the Death of the Week, but we
Yeah.
got so excited about jumping in here. We'll come
Completely
right
forgot
back to
about
the
that.
interview, but before we do, this week's Death of the Week brought to you by the Thedaysgrimm.com. See, I'm already getting my words twisted just thinking about
Yeah,
it, so
good
I'm going
thing
to let
I'm reading
Drew
this.
take this one away.
Okay, so off to a hot start. I don't know how to say this word. Former
Socceroo?
Socceroo died after catheter connected to oxygen, coroner told. A former whatever died in the hospital because his urinary catheter was wrongly connected to an oxygen supply, leading to a burst bladder and collapsed lungs. An inquest is being held into the death of at Adelaide's Queen Elizabeth Hospital on the 19th of September. The coroner will hear that Mr. Oxygen supply was incorrectly connected, resulting in his bladder inflating with oxygen, then bursting and his lungs collapsing from the pressure of the oxygen.
Woof. That's rough. We're just going to stop there with that.
Yeah, that's.
We've had soup injected into veins, and now we've got an oxygen blown up.
I was not here for the soup injection one.
That's wild.
I want to know what a socceroo is.
Yeah, I don't.
We
gonna
have
Google
to
that.
find that out because it's like, what is that? It's some crazy Australian thing, right? Probably.
Socceroos.
It's an Australian football or soccer team.
This dude was old. It said he was like 78. So I don't know if he used to be in. Maybe he owns
he was
the
like
team or on the team. Oh, right here. Cordes Hertz played for Austria in the world's
Australia
first attempt to qualify for the World Cup. Wow. Oh, because he had a fall and hallucinations.
Wow.
Yeah,
So I originally came across this article because I was looking up like crazy deaths and all this and that from like the Europe area, since I knew we were going to talk about that a little bit. And there was like a case of a guy's bladder exploding because he was at like a ritzy dinner and he knew it was rude to get up and use the restroom during the dinner. So his bladder exploded from that. So I just looked up strange bladder exploding death and this popped up.
Wow.
This
is like
was there a lot of results for strange bladder exploding?
This was it. Other than that guy from like the 1800s. And I was like, I'm not doing an 1800s death. I want something a little more.
That's bad.
But
that's that's the kind of thing that the hospital. It sounds like
they need some more PhDs instead of just a nursing degree.
I don't know how that mistake gets made. I feel like maybe you shouldn't.
Let's
it's
keep
just
our
like
cords
common
in separate
sense
places,
to not pump oxygen into someone's bladder, but I don't know.
Maybe they need to hire some audio technicians to run cords for them.
I don't even know what else to say about this because I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, that when they said an inquest is being held, it makes me think that this is because I actually don't know that much about Australia.
And don't Google bizarre deaths in Russia because you're just gonna get oligarchies for 9 pages.
When they say inquest, it makes me think this is like a socialized. It probably has socialized medicine in Australia, and then like they probably have resource problems, there with it. I don't, and that because it would be like. In the United States, it would be like the insurance companies are going to sue. Right. There would be like some lawsuit going on. But in a government run thing, they're like, oh, we're going to do a research on this.
Interesting. Well, that's this week's Death of the Week brought to you by Thedaysgrimm.com. So you're in college, and that's when they send you over to the Soviet Union. How long were you in the Soviet Union?
I was not there that long. It was only a semester. And
so what's that in college? 5 months?
Yeah, 4 months, 4 or 5 months.
So you were leaving as the Union was falling.
It was crazy, yeah. Literally 6 weeks later, the whole thing falls down.
And on your bio, on your page, you mentioned that you kind of studied some of the hire the elites of like Russia and their
Right.
businesses in different fields.
Right.
What did you get to study them while you were there that 4 months?
No, at that time, I really was just kind of surviving, like
Trying to understand
what was going
classes.
on, not, learning my Russian. Yeah, I didn't do any research at that point.
Was there a culture shock for you?
Oh yeah. Yes. I mean, it was intense.
What was one of the first like culture shocks you think?
The first culture shocks, I mean, there were a lot of them, but you get onto, probably, one of the ones that you first experience is like you get out of the airplane and then you take public transportation and you're close to a lot of people. There's a lot of garlic being
Really?
eaten in the Soviet Union.
You're like,
so you really can smell it.
Yeah,
I mean, the smell.
Grew up in Wisconsin, and
right.
like you don't take public
Transportation
transit in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Because you just drive everywhere.
Yes.
So that alone would be a culture
Was
shock.
there any like erotic meats or anything you got to try?
No. Oh, exotic meats?
Yeah.
You said erotic. That's
erotic.
My bad. I meant exotic. Sorry.
Let's see. Were there?
Did you try bear while you were there?
No, they didn't have that. Like I said, it was really bad with food. Like they had shortages. So there wasn't that kind of thing there. The food was pretty plain.
What about Karl Marx's book that you can't get now in the U.S. or
right.
you got to get it only?
It was
through
everywhere
people?
there.
Really? Was it hard to get at that time in the U.S. or was it in certain classes?
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was like there. When I grew up in Madison, they used to have they're no longer anymore. But in the 80s, before the fall of the Soviet Union, most college towns had like something called the People's Bookstore, and they would have like all this Marxist literature there. And so like Madison had a People's Bookstore, and they would, you could walk in there and find, the Marxist interpretation of American television or something, like it was everywhere.
Interesting. That's a wild concept to think about. Cause like I tried to look up the book to see if I could like buy it 2 weeks ago and it's not.
You can't find it?
No, not. I mean, I'm sure I could buy it on eBay or something like that, but like not from like an actual bookstore or anything, or no audiobook version of it.
Yeah, that'd be tough to read. The audiobook version of Capital.
So where do you go from there?
So after I graduated, I moved to Russia. Yeah, for like six months or so.
So what's their green card process?
No, at the time it was total Wild West. Like you just
go.
You go on like a tourist visa.
Was that a hard decision to make?
It was at the time. A lot of people were moving who graduated from college were going to Prague. That was like the big place,
which is in Greece, right?
Or
is that Turkey?
Do not know.
Czech Republic.
I've got some friends from the Czech Republic.
Yeah, the Czech Republic, and so a lot of people were moving there, and then I was like, well, I'm going to go to Russia. I knew some people there, and so I worked there, and I translated for the diplomatic community there. So, and I worked at nights, because because the diplomatic community didn't know how to speak Russian. And so they needed to have translation of the thing of the newspapers. And so I worked with Russians, and we would like.
Was there any weird like espionage things going on there in that building? Because you hear about like all the crazy stuff of that time. Like they had to destroy the U.S. embassy and like rebuild it due to. Yeah,
there. It's interesting you say that. Like a lot of people. My Russian friends, they would say, "Hey, they wouldn't talk to me. They would talk to my friends and relatives and be like, "Hey, do you know that Andy's a spy?" And they're like, "No, he's not."
Just like you had an association.
Yeah,
with
like
Russia,
it was. So, therefore, I was somehow, and then But I did, later on, after I went to for my PhD and finished my doctorate, I did get calls from what was like the CIA. They don't call them, the CIA doesn't have they call them like the Center for Strategic Initiatives or something. They did reach out to me, but I wasn't really interested in any of that.
Right.
It was not my, I'm not into that.
Yeah, you'd probably have a very different life now.
I have a totally different life.
So how long were you living in Russia?
Just 6 months. And then I came back and then I did something completely different. I joined a band and I played music for like 2 years.
Before we get into that, do you still can you still speak Russian? Are you still fluent?
Yes. Yeah. And so I went, the last time I went was 2017.
What was that like, seeing the progress of Russia over this, like from when you went after college to now that it's Russia, I guess.
It's kind of depressing, really, for me. There was a lot of hope in the 90s for, Russia to join Europe. And that was kind of, that was definitely, I was part of that, that's why I was interested. I was like, oh, well now, Europe is going to be united.
Because they're an interesting group of people.
Yeah.
I mean, just the culture, their architecture. I mean, it's stunning.
Yes.
And then just like the vastness of the amount of space it takes up, and you got these people that live in Siberia, and then you got these other people that live close to the
incredible
mountains. And
it's incredible. I mean, it didn't work. They wanted to become part of that was the idea in the 90s, was to become part of it. Didn't work because of the things that you mentioned. Like, it's just so different.
Right.
There's so many different factors. It's so large and has so many different ethnicities.
Do you think America negated that just by being on one coastal front and expanding as it went, versus like, the Soviet Union already had all this territory, and then it's got to like rebrand and remorale the whole nation behind this one vast area?
So,
because that's like why they had all the annexes and falling out, like Ukraine and everything,
Right.
like that whole area, Crimea and all them. I feel like they kind of broke out because you got this vast area. And so like we haven't had a collapse in the United States yet. But like the way we grew, I feel like was from the eastern coast all the way to the western coast, like as we went on, versus Soviet Union collapsed and all those clans of people, because that's basically what it was in my mind, right? Is like counties basically joining up and forming states to form.
Yeah, I mean, there were separate countries in the Soviet Union: Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, and then they did break away, and they were they felt like they were
culturally different
than Russia. And so Russia's always been kind of the dominant ethnicity there in the Soviet Union and in that sphere. And it's still like that within Russia, because there are other ethnicities. And then so like in Siberia, for example, as you mentioned, like there'll be like ethnic Yakutians who
like
are
almost are Eskimos.
Right. And then the Russians go in there and extract resources and
because everything is going back to the main homeland, the hierarchy.
Right. And so, it's still going on within Russia, but it used to be like.
Do you think that's like, it's so weird? Because like, I feel this may be off the wall. I feel like that version of like the whole system, like communism, and then like, what would you say we have here?
Or you could say capitalism.
Like they're so close, like in like a almost like a pyramid scheme of things, but yet so different in a way.
Right. I mean, they probably have, depending on the time, there's probably a similarity in terms of like the structure of
there's
classes. And
there's
stuff.
like overlaps, because there's like a fully like communist or socialist or capitalist society like isn't really a thing. There's aspects of I'm blanking.
Right. There are aspects of both in every, like we have
like public works
here.
and like public school, that would be considered socialism, but Americans would freak out if you told them that.
Yes.
So like there's similarities.
Yes.
So after Russia, where do you go?
So like I said, after Russia, I was, the other thing that I did, so my first love really is playing music. So
you played, what was the genre of the band?
I would call us, we were alternative rock, I would say, but we weren't grunge. That was kind of our problem and why I got out of it.
That was like the style of the
style
time.
In the 90s, like grunge was like huge. What was it? Nirvana and Pearl Jam.
Was music, you played guitar before you went to Russia?
Yeah. So I started playing guitar when I was like 12.
Did you learn any new tricks while you were in Russia? A different way to play?
I did. Yeah, I did. Definitely. Like I got some like minor things. And actually I had a ska band in college.
I don't know what's that?
Ska? Ska. It's like,
I don't, off the top of my head.
SQUA?
No, SKA. Ska music, like the
style of fast popular music having strong offbeat and
like Jamaican,
originating in Jamaica.
Yeah. Interesting.
And we added like little like Eastern European things to it. So I was definitely kind of influenced by that.
So 2 years in a band. Yeah, and it kind of falls apart because you guys weren't grungy enough for the time.
Yeah, and we were like, we were hoping to get a record deal. That was the whole, like that at the time. It was like, so you're a band and you try to get a record deal and they would give you boatloads of money to make a record, like $500,000. And then you'd be like, oh, okay. Then you were signed with the label and none of that materialized.
So then what'd you do from there?
Well, then I was like, okay, maybe I'll go back to graduate school, And so I took, it was like 3 years after I had graduated from college. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to go back to graduate school. Maybe I'll continue with this stuff on Russia. And I did go to graduate school. And I was lucky too. I wanted to say this. I got lucky to go to graduate school, and where I did, I went to Cornell and then Columbia. Was that at the time, the 90s, like the economy was like, really good.
Yeah. Didn't you say that you did not pay to go to grad school at all?
I didn't pay to go to grad. That's correct. Yeah. And the economy was really good. Like the 90s, I hate to sound like an old man, like the 90s were amazing.
That's what I hear. I was born in the 90s. Drew missed out on it, but
yeah. Just amazing. Like we had won the Cold War, quote unquote. And, there was, the government was like making money, the .com, all this computer revolution that was occurring. And so everybody who graduated, or a lot of people who graduated from college, were like, oh, I'm going to go into tech.
Speaking of, so while you're in college and this tech boom is going on, does that change the like sociology of like, because there was a sociological shift, I feel like in the 90s. Right? Yeah. It was more like family and community based, and then this technology transition kind of.
For sure.
So did that like change your studying, or like did
not me personally, but
or teaching it now to like
sure.
With the internet, like society would become more like globalized, basically. Yeah. So before, you had no way of contacting someone across the world. And in the 90s, it wasn't as easy as it is now, but like
were you able
that change, I feel like would have an effect.
It was big.
Were you able to reconnect with people that you met in Russia, like during that boom?
I have. Yeah. Yeah. You mean like
just in general, like communication, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah. I usually tell the story because it sort of highlights what you're talking about, that when I was in the Soviet Union, to call my parents, right? This is 1991. To call my parents, to talk to them, I had to go. I lived in a dorm. I had to get on public transport, go down to the Central Telegraph and order a phone call. And then they would dial the number and I would run to the phone and I could talk to them.
Wow.
That's how you called someone.
And now you just pull it out of your pocket and dial away.
And that's like, that was from 91. So yeah, it has been huge. And the amount of changes in society that technology has brought.
And is going to bring.
Yeah. And not all of it's great, right?
Right.
Not all of it's great.
So you finished graduate school.
Yep.
What do you go and get your doctorate immediately, or?
Well, yeah. It's usually all together. So it's like, you enter graduate school. It's like a 7-year process. So I was there for 7 years.
7 years is a long time.
It is a long time. But in that time I lived in Russia. That's where I really, did my dissertation research. And then I went to England. So I got a job in England, was my first job.
And a lot of more tea. Did you become a tea fiend?
I never did.
No,
never did. I'm 100% coffee.
What about culture shocks in Europe? Because we come from European backgrounds, most of us in the U.S., and then you go to I feel like they invented the English language and talk crazy weird compared to us.
Two countries separated by a common language. You
Right.
know, I mean, we really were. We say things differently.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Like a British accent, it sounds completely different from our accents, but there's still like traces of it in like Southern accents, and there's like different regions of the U.S. that have different parts of that accent still remaining. You just
Like
sounds
the Boston.
The Boston,
Yeah.
I would say definitely there.
Or
Yeah.
even you said over there they call it black humor, and here we call it dark humor, or like different little weird
they like
nuances.
put U's in things that don't need
Right.
U's.
Yes.
or what do they call the toilet? Don't they call it? Yeah, the loo.
The loo. Yeah. I mean, there were all kinds of things like that where, you would say one thing, I say tomato, you say tomato, I mean, it was, and that you get over that pretty quickly. But beyond that, the other thing about England is that it's like it's an island culture. Like they don't,
A ton of fish.
yeah. And then, but also that they're not welcoming to people, to newcomers.
It's like you're not from here.
You're not
so-
from here, right? Whereas in America, people are, like coming through, or other parts of Europe, people are walking through your neighborhood or your town and traveling somewhere. And so you're going to get a lot of people, migrating through. But in England, there never was that. So we kind of my wife and I, we lived in I would say we lived in an immigrant enclave, of like other people who were
Like a community
of outsiders. And we never really, I mean, as much as I loved England, because I really did. I really enjoyed a lot of things about it. We never really fit in.
How long were you?
5 years.
5 years.
5 years. My son was born there.
So he's got dual citizenship.
He does not.
Oh.
He does not. You don't. He. In order to get citizenship there, you have to demonstrate that you have some kind of heritage. And
I thought it was just like if you're born there, but I guess
no. I mean, I think the United States is unique that way.
yeah.
Whereas if you're born in the United States, you automatically are
Considered a citizen.
But in Europe, it's not that way. And
Do you think I feel like United States citizens have a bit more curiosity versus other countries. Like you said in Europe, like if a European would have moved into this community and would like walk their dog and somebody would realize that they're slightly different, like we would ask questions, try to get to know them, see what's different about their culture.
right.
Whereas like you're kind of describing, they're like, we're just going to leave this guy alone.
Yeah, they don't really integrate. Like there was never like when we moved to Evansville, our neighbor brought over some like pie and was like, welcome to the neighborhood,
You're like, I don't know you. Why are you talking to me?
But then again, I mean, in England, our neighbors never invited us over.
So what did you do for work in Europe?
I was a sociologist, so I taught sociology there.
So at that time, we had your bio pulled up,
Yeah.
and you got all these. Where was the list of
Publications.
Yeah. So like these papers
I
that
started publishing then. Yes.
so that's a lot of like writing. Do you enjoy writing?
That's a tough question. I like to write when I'm in the zone.
Like how many pages long do you think these pages like are? Is this,
Like each one's like, 20, 30 pages.
and they're all, I assume, like that format where you got to cite your sources and everything.
It's
like
very,
that.
very academic. It's all, double blind.
Do you have a process that helps you get in that zone, or does a moment just hit you, like a connection that you made between two different points in time? And
it's something that I have to work at. It's not something that I have to set aside time. Usually in the summer is when I do this, because during the semester I'm pretty busy. So it's like in the summertime I can, kind of get into the zone of writing.
I just imagine like a mad office, like a room like this with just posters of like graphs of like, the economy during this time and then other world events of that year below it.
It can be a little crazy. And my office is is not really neat. So, sometimes it, requires you just like, spending time doing that. The hard thing was, it's interesting is that when I first started writing, I had just quit smoking. And because I was a smoker and I wrote my dissertation smoking, I just was Marlboro Reds. I just smoked all the time. And, I don't think I could have done my dissertation without Marlboro Reds. And so I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to write without smoking.
I feel that way about driving and smoking because I used to deliver municipal supplies and I would smoke cigarettes the whole time I drove.
Yes.
And then, so now when the most time I fiend for a cigarette or nicotine is when I'm driving, and I'll just hit it nonstop the whole time I drive.
Yeah.
So you find that like when you write, like you get a weird craving?
I did initially. And then, now I just, now I enjoy it, when my son was small, it was like a good, like way to
negate smoking.
Yeah. And negate smoking and to go and write. So I was like, okay, I don't have to change diapers. I'm writing,
Right.
It's like changing diapers, writing. So I enjoyed that, then, and I do enjoy writing. It's not easy though.
What are some inventions that you think like drastically changed to like the sociology of like the humans? Like, because like you went from writing to typewriter to computer. Was that like, you think that had a play just in like mass? Because it's basically getting knowledge out faster. Like the printing press changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's not so much sociology. It's just people have more access to information. So kind of everything developed and changed with the development of like technology and
or like social network that changed. Yeah.
So, I'm glad you brought, Drew, you took the class.
I was in your social networks class last semester.
The thing about social networks is that when I started studying it in the 90s, it was like something you did like on a DOS computer, you know what I mean? And you had
like blue screens
and it was really esoteric. I mean, you know what I mean? Like the people who worked in social network analysis were really esoteric. And the basic idea behind that is that of social network analysis, our relationships are the most important part of, or one of the more important parts of our lives and how we're connected. And sociology and the people who I was working with in graduate school, they were, they did this all on DOS, and then the computer revolution happens and it's all Windows based. And, now we've got all these great,
it's like Macintoshes, the best out there.
Looks great. And then the big thing that happened was that some of these ideas actually are part of like the algorithmic world that we live in. So like the basis of Google, how when you type in Google, like the patent for Google is based on social network analysis and looking for patterns. And then, so all the things, so like that whole area that we now live in society, where things are based on the likes that you have, the links that you go in, the kinds of advertisement that you get, like that, and scroll down in your feed, are all based on sort of connections that we've had, and that comes from social network analysis.
What about is there any sociology behind like the colors? Do you guys talk about that in like the class? Like Facebook, the color blue of Facebook is to get you to engage with it more. Or like the yellow of Snapchat.
I bet there is a field. I
feel like that might be more. Well, I was gonna say that might be more psychology, but I feel like it could fit sociology. I just, in my very limited knowledge, I don't know.
I'm extremely limited compared to you.
But you're interested in like that? How?
Well,
colors?
I know that there is an actual thing on it.
People, when they're designing apps and websites, they will have people designated to like figure out
this
like
color
the
blue
design
hits
and the
a certain
colors.
part of your brain that's like more
People,
friendly or calming,
like,
or
perceive it differently. Yeah.
And then like the dopamine hit you get from each one and your interactions. It's kind of wild. Like, does that go into?
Like there probably is a field of sociology that studies it, but I'm not aware of it.
So what would you say like your main? You did a lot on basically that you got business. British business leaders, Russia and post-Soviet studies, network mobilization and origins of Putin colonization. So you would say like you specialize, you think, in like the Russian world.
I would say, if I would call myself, I'd say I'm a network analyst. So I do social networks, and I study different expressions of that. So I studied it in Britain, and like how the people who run the corporations are all from Oxford and Cambridge, and have knighthoods, and
they're primarily like middle-aged
class and
white men, and like.
So one thing I wanted to touch on was small business throughout, because you mentioned in your bio you really like the small network and how it goes up from there. Would you say there's a big difference in small business here in the U.S. versus the Soviet Union / Russia versus like Europe? I feel like maybe in Europe they rely more on like most of your business is small business, and then like the big guy gets the cut of each small business. Or
I think the United States probably is more entrepreneurial that way. Like the small businesses are more prevalent here than they are in Europe, and if they exist in Europe, or they do exist, certainly in the Soviet Union, when it was the Soviet Union, it was all underground. All like,
and is that more like exchange of resources? Like my family grows grains, your family has cows, we give you grains, we get one cow. Is that what you mean by like more underground?
Yeah, more underground, sort of informal, types of relationships.
Do you see a difference in economy through those, like through the difference of like here we're, our backbone may be small business, whereas in like Russia, it may not be small business.
Right. It's not, it's oil, like that's how they make people, like that's a big thing. And then, so they were like, what happened in Russia was they thought all these foreigners were buying up the oil, and they said, well, you can't do that anymore. It's going to go back into Russia. And so they kicked out all the foreigners owning the oil and gas. Because it's so like their whole economy is based on it.
Well, and like our economy, low key, I feel like kind of is based on coal. Because if we shut off coal, you shut off electric, and then everybody's lost from there.
Yeah. I mean, we are in some ways like definitely dependent on those industries, but not to the point where we have nothing else.
Right.
Like, and in Russia, it's kind of like a mono economy.
Whereas here we have like choices. You got solar, hydroelectric.
Yeah. And then you can be involved in like tech, or, you can do other kinds of, there's other profitable, industries.
And when you're looking at these, structural analysis, what goes into that, you think, of like, is that more of like we're pushing X amount of resources into tech or X amount of resources into agriculture, or?
Well, I mean, I really look at it like the small kind of, I don't look at that big. Sometimes I do look at the big picture, but I'm more with the networks. It's more about like personal relationships.
Yeah. So like an example would be the like musicians and bands,
right?
Social networks.
Yeah, I was going to bring that. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
So do you do that like in your class with like modern day things? Like if you're starting a band versus a podcast, like your social networking?
The what we did in the last semester of his social networks class was everyone chose a band, and we went and looked at all of their studio albums and wrote down every person who was involved in that, and then like the labels and like record companies, and then you I don't remember the name of the software that you put it into.
Yeah, UCINet, yes.
Yeah, so you put it into UCINet and it like makes all these connections, and you
like
see
a spider web.
Yeah,
connection.
like a spider web, yeah.
And you see who has the strongest like relationships, and you kind of figure out what aspects make like a successful band.
Right.
Did you learn any interesting bands while assigning this project?
Yeah, I did. I mean, there was a bunch of people did. I forgot what you did, Drew. What was yours?
I did Nirvana.
You did Nirvana. They didn't have too many.
It has 3 studio albums.
Yeah, they were pretty.
It's a very small network.
Small network, yeah. Although they brought in
Dave Grohl.
Dave Grohl.
Which, I mean, the only people who were on all 3 albums were Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain, and then Dave Grohl was on 2, I think. Right. So they're the like primary people in that. But I think I was gonna make it hard on myself and do Fleetwood Mac, but you said you already did. I did
Fleetwood, because Fleetwood Mac is like the best example of like the theory. One of the theories that I'm testing is that. So it's sort of like what makes a successful ensemble or musical artist, either a band or an individual.
Do you do that throughout time, like Beethoven, Mozart?
No, we're only doing, I'm only doing, okay, my thing is, because I knew someone who did it like for jazz recordings. So I'm only doing, and we only did in this class, bands that were in the Rolling Stone top 500 albums, or bands or musical artists. So it's not everybody. And so the kind of thing that we're looking at is like, is it that, like a band like U2, do you know U2? Like they've had the same group of people in the band from the beginning up until now. Although it seems like at the Sphere, they've got like a new drummer.
I feel like drummers they get cycled through a lot, because Nirvana had like 6 before they even.
Right. There's that Spinal Tap, I don't know if you've ever seen Spinal Tap, the movie. And that was one of the jokes in Spinal Tap, that they have like their drummer spontaneously combusted on the stool.
Did you ever watch the knockoff, The Russells? That's like made by the same guys that made the Monty Python, but it's really? It's a knockoff of the Beatles.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, the Ruddles.
Yeah, the Ruddles.
Yes, yeah,
that's funny. So basically, just the studying. So, do you think you specialize more in music, or are there other?
Well, here's the thing. I did all this stuff in Russia. I can't go to Russia anymore.
Really? Yeah. Is there a story behind that? Can you not talk about it?
I mean, no, I can't. No, it's because it's in war. It's we're basically the Ukraine,
Russia and Ukraine stuff.
Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, like we're America's persona non grata in Russia, and so like if I were to show up there, they wouldn't want to, they wouldn't want to cooperate with me. So I can't do that. So I'm like, well, I'll start studying something else that I like, which is music, and looking at like, okay, what makes a successful record, just not in terms of, because obviously, this is, if we get back to like what we said before, obviously the individual has a role, the individual, is creative, but there's something about their context as well.
When you put them in a group, it makes a specific sound.
Yeah, it makes a sound, and that brings new ideas, and so that's the part that I'm trying to get at. in this project.
So also in your bio, there's a part here about a little town just
Oh yeah,
west of
Northeast?
here,
I don't
just
know.
west of here,
Yes.
called New Harmony. And in there, if you scroll down a little bit, Drew, it talks about it in the bio.
Okay.
But basically, in this time where New Harmony's founded, I feel like the United States had a lot of, like you see it in Irish with the Irish Socialist Party,
Right.
with the ISP. But like I feel like America at the time had like socialist little pop-ups
They did,
all
didn't
throughout
they?
the place, and so New Harmony was we joke about it previously about like it was founded in this cult mentality
Yeah.
or whatever. But so what you've gotten into some
I mean,
research in that? Is it just because it was the closest little hub to where you live and
You know,
work?
I mean, when we moved here, or my wife and I moved here, and when I started, USI has a strong connection with New Harmony, and so I started learning about it, and I'd go to New Harmony, and
I mean, it's a beautiful
it's a
little
cool
secluded
place.
town.
and so then I was like, wow, and then I started reading about there were two communities there. One was like a religious community, and then the other one was a secular community of Owenites. And I'm like, wait a second, these guys were the first socialist, like, community or experiment. And it happened right here. I mean, arguably one of the first. Maybe there was like one
Few
other
others
one
yeah.
pretty much at the same time, where and Owen made the declaration. I mean, this is how crazy it is. In New Harmony, he made the declaration of mental independence from marriage, from private property, and from religion. In New Harmony, then I was like, wow, this is pretty radical stuff to be happening here. And so I started looking into it and reading more about Owen, who was from Scotland. And, it just, and they weren't very successful too. That was the other thing.
Say, what were like some of the early problems that you think they ran into?
They definitely had a free rider problem. So everybody it was like, sometimes people talk about, oh, we need universal basic income, right?
Right, but then a certain class of people would just stop working and only live on that.
Right. That sometimes that you get people who are free riders, and that's what happened in New Harmony when they instituted this, because Owen was like this rich guy, and he was like, okay, well, I'll pay everyone to live here. You just got to do what you need to do. And nobody did any work, or I shouldn't say no one did, but there was
a few people
to do most of the work. And then the whole community got in, was in conflict as a result of that, where I was like,
basically a civil war in a little town.
Yeah. And so that's a problem for, that socialist communities have always had to deal with. Even in the Soviet Union, they had that problem. I mean, the funny thing is we kind of had that weirdly in America during the pandemic.
Yeah, that was a crazy time to think about too. Like just a weird.
You get a check from Trump, man.
Yeah, Trump bucks. I built a computer with it.
I didn't get shit.
Were you too young?
You were too young. Yeah.
Well, I was just young enough to where my parents claimed me on their taxes for that, like the previous year. So they I was too old for them to get the bonus of them of
There's like an additional amount,
and then I was claimed on their taxes, so I didn't get anything, and they also made too much money to get anything,
to get the other. Yes,
which I mean, I wasn't struggling or anything, so it's fine. But
but
I would have appreciated the money.
It was interesting to watch during that time. Like at first, the first 2 weeks, people are like, okay, we can't really do anything, and then I was doing little side jobs for extra money along with the check, and building a editing computer so I could do more. But then you had other people that just wasted 2 years of their, they just sat there and did nothing for 2 years.
I was working at Journeys and Walmart, so
yeah, and that, that's the issue with it, with university. You got to create some kind of incentive for people.
I'm sure that, I mean, just thinking off the wall here, there's going to be some form of process maybe eventually down the line where something like that may happen. But I feel like they'll have to incorporate it into like social media where like every time you scroll, there's some background process like mining Bitcoin, or like every time you scroll, there's some automated process that happens on the other end.
Detrimental to like society and people's mental health.
I mean,
giving them an
already there,
incentive
though,
to make money on social media, which I mean, you already can do, but that would be awful.
It's wild. So, I asked you before the show, before we started recording, if you played any games, and you said no, but games have gone, vast over the time.
Yeah.
The only reason I asked that was like from a strategic perspective. I play a lot of chess and other online strategy games and everything like that. But like in these changes of like, like New Harmony and stuff like that, like you think you look at things from a more zoomed out strategical standpoint? Like you think if you played one of these strategy games,
maybe I would. I should check it out. I don't know.
Like from just a more cultural perspective.
Got to get you on Sims.
Yeah.
Or
like
Civ.
SimCity, right? Yeah.
I was telling him about Civ, and like you can search different branches of like technology or like culture and stuff like that.
Yeah. I probably would like that. I think, it's just never been my thing. Like if I have free time, I pick up the guitar.
So does history play into this at all? Like going into Russia, like, did you have to learn a lot about Russian history? Like, just different areas
I liked it. I mean, I love history.
Do you think our history books are different than theirs?
Oh, yeah.
See, that's one thing I would like. So like this last year, Drew and our listeners know, I picked up a Bible and a Quran.
Yeah.
And I read them both,
right.
And like that, there's a lot of common ground or whatever, but I almost wonder like what the difference would be like in history books. Like if I picked up a U.S. history book versus like a USSR history book.
Oh, it's huge.
Russian,
I mean, like one of the big things that they're a little bit strident about their history. So like if somebody writes something,
well, like Stalin and how many people he killed, we'll never truly know.
Yeah. They probably would be a lot of backlash against someone who would do that. But there are certain are there
sociological benefits of doing it that way in a country?
I mean, I don't, benefits. I don't think I would use the word, but I think for as a method of control, yeah, you know what I mean. As a method
because you control what people know and their like where they get their information. So if you don't want them to know about some bad shit that you did or that happened,
I mean, there was the famous case of like literally in the Soviet Union, they airbrushed people out of photographs. So it was like Stalin was sitting next to Bukharin or some guy, I don't know. And they were like, we don't like this guy. It's like when you were a kid, or at least when I was a kid, you're
marking out
someone's face. They literally airbrush these people out of history.
That's wild.
And
does that make you think at all too? So like I think a lot about no matter how much we network in this day and time, like we're like a lot of people are just forgotten. You live your life and then you're forgotten about come 3 or 4 generations.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah. I mean, it depends on what maybe I think one of the nice things
about technology
is that, and families. I think families sometimes remember people over a long generation. You know what I mean? Like someone might do like a family history.
Right, like a family tree, like I did, and I found my Cherokee, or not Cherokee, but the North Virginia lady. Lovely Love and her son. What'd she name her son?
I have no idea.
It was something Curtis Berry. It was something Berry. Happy Berry Curtis.
Wow.
But yeah, I did a little lineage look up this last year as well.
Did you?
It's definitely interesting to see like where all your branches of family come from.
And I think those are places where the memory of people.
Do you think we'll hit a
maintains.
time where technology no longer exists though? So like we don't know how Egyptians drilled perfect circles, and that technology is lost to us.
Right.
So like I wonder if we hit a certain time where we go all technology based, and then that internet or the satellites get shut off, and then we lose all that history.
I don't know if we'll get to that point, but
maybe not in our lifetime.
I don't.
No, I see what you're saying.
It brings up something interesting, like even with like movies and TV shows and like media, physical media isn't like a thing anymore.
Right.
You're not buying DVDs, and there's been cases of movies that are made and they're like put on a streaming service and then they're just deleted. Like gone forever, no one can find it because there's not physical media
like
of it.
Books that are being printed, like there's certain books that are no longer printed, and it's like there's only limited copies of this, just like Karl Marx's book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a serious issue for historians.
Or do you think, as a PhD and a college professor, that you have access to more books than like the average street Joe like myself? Like if I were trying to get a copy of Mein Kampf, like you could probably order it no problem.
For sure. Yeah, I think when you're at a university, universities pay like, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to have access to peer-reviewed journals, and so there's way more information. Like so, I always say this to students: like the smartest people that I've met are people you've never heard of. Like seriously, like never. I mean, they like wow, and they just are writing in sociology journals. I mean, granted, I'm not saying that there are no other smart people, but in my world, there are all kinds of really intelligent people who write in these journals. I'm not, I just have a small bit in it. I'm not like a big fish or anything. I mean,
speaking of academic journals and publications, you just got something published recently, right? And is that this one?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, the one on critical letter writing. It's kind of interesting. Did you want to ask a question about that? Or?
I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
It's what's interesting about that. What we were talking about just right now is that to do that research, I had to physically go to a library, and they had the letters that people had handwritten. This was like handwritten in the 70s, and they had put them together in dossiers, and I read them, and then so you wonder like what happens to this stuff now that all the people are producing, about their lives, and where is that going? Like, is it being...
It's just on a social media feed now.
It's not, yeah.
Versus a notebook written somewhere.
Yeah.
Which I find, like hard because like, I was born right luckily I was born in the 90s. So like we didn't have like all the crazy technology, and we had computers in elementary school, but then like we didn't hit social media till like middle school,
so you were like high school.
So
right.
But it's such a weird, like middle school you have journals, and then like high school you just get a cell phone and bye journals.
Right.
But it's
and
all,
so you don't have any like
you don't have any memoirs or records of your own life and stuff other than what Time Hop or whatever apps pull.
And then when you move like from phone to phone, a lot of stuff is gone.
Or unless you pay to carry that invisible cloud space with you. It's wild.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for anybody wanting to build up their social network?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the main insights of social network analysis is that oftentimes it's, you want to like, when you're developing a network, you want to reach out to people who are maybe not your best friends, but you kind of know, friend of friends.
Your loose ties.
Your weak ties.
Oh,
and that is really where how people get new information and are able to innovate.
So you're the reason Drew got so many internships last year.
I mean, yeah, that's basically you and Brian were a weak tie. Like I had mutual friends that came on this podcast, and that's
Oh, really?
why I ended up here. So
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we picked Drew up. We needed somebody to do that spot, and he filled it. And I feel like, I mean, you feel like your network's grown through the podcast?
yeah, I mean, I've definitely would not have met most of these people that we interview.
And it just makes you think too. I find like doing a podcast like one of my favorite things. One, it's guaranteed bro time. I get to come and I get to see Drew and Brian and hang out every week, once a week, you know. But then also like just meeting these interesting individuals such as yourself that make you think about different things and different perspectives and just like.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's a great, you know, when Drew told me about this, you know, I was like, yeah, I that's a great format. And I learned a lot when I listened to that.
With Space Monkeys. Shout out to Space Monkeys. They actually, they hooked us up with the records set up and everything.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I learned a lot about them, and so next time I go there, I'm gonna mention that and some things, and sort of like, you know, sort of also have also create like more cohesion too,
right?
You know,
and strengthen that network bond you have with them too,
right?
It's a pretty interesting.
I mean, like you talked about strengthening your social network. Would you have advice for people who like want to get into studying social networks or studying just sociology in general, like a sociology student, I guess, because I feel like
your degree will be in sociology,
I guess
won't it?
My degree will be in sociology. It's kind of a backup plan, but
right. I mean, here's the thing. You know, when you study something like sociology, psychology, most people don't become sociologist, or, you know, you study biology, most people don't become biologists, but it does mean that you can go into different kinds of work where those sociological insights are important.
Well, like Drew, you want to make movies or films or whatever.
Yeah.
That, I'm planning on this spring semester making a documentary about like, teachers and teacher burnout, which I think I was talking to you about that a couple weeks ago at the Social Club dinner, but, like, I think I'm gonna use like the sociology stuff that I've learned and combine it with like filmmaking to do that. And I want to like design like a research survey, and so I can have statistics to put in that. So it's definitely like useful in things that are like aren't just becoming a sociologist.
Like becoming a sociologist is like, you know, they're like 4 or 5% of, you know what I mean? Like people who major in sociology, very small. But most of what you do is, you know, you go into other kinds of work. You work, you know, if you work, you know, one of the things that I always mention is, you know, if you want to become a doctor now, the MCAT, which is like the entrance exam for med school, they have a whole section on sociology. Because if you're a doctor, you need to know about people's backgrounds, you know, like how much, you know, what their socioeconomic status is.
Like if addiction runs in their family.
Addiction runs in their family, or they, you know, are they really going to be able to, you know, afford this thing that you're asking them to do? You know, all those issues are really important.
Do you think if somebody were to take sociology and then psychology and like you learned them both, that would be like a power dynamic, almost like the grade A narcissism kit, you know, like I can basically manipulate or read cues from anybody and fit them in my social network?
No, it probably would. Yeah. I mean, I don't know psychology very well, so.
Because I know that there's what do they call them? Psychopaths and sociopaths?
Yeah.
You could be both.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a word for that little common ground there.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, was there ever a dark moment on, you know, this psychology path and then sociology? Sorry, I just got them mixed up talking about them both. Sociology path. And like you don't have to go into the moment necessarily. We care more about what pulled you through that dark moment. But
you know, you brought that up, and I started thinking about it. You know, when I write, there have been a few of these, articles that I've written that got rejected a lot, right? And you send something out
After pouring your heart
sweat into it,
tears,
and then they have what's called a double-blind peer review. So that they don't know my name, I don't know their names, and they write criticism of what you did, and they rejected me again and again and again for one of my articles, and it was really tough, because when you get the rejection, it's one thing you have like 2 or 3, but when I was like on 6, and sometimes they were like, oh, you just need to make this one change and then we'll accept it. And then, you need to, do X, and then I do X, and then they still reject it. And then, what they write is very, it can be really hurtful, know?
Because they're anonymous. You don't know who it is.
Well, Angie poured so much time into it and research and writing segments here that fit in there and vice versa.
So, I mean, like dealing with failure is part of growing.
Yeah, I think there's a similarity between like being an academic and having trying to get something published and it being rejected over and over, and then being like a creative person, and whether it's like music or film, and you're gonna be rejected over and over and over. Yes. And you kind of experience that with your band after college.
I did too. Yes, I did.
So there's definitely some similarities.
Yeah, there's some definite similarities, and what oftentimes motivates me in those situations is it's not a great emotion, really. Sometimes it's like I'll show them kind of emotion.
A lot of people nowadays are like they take that internal conflict, and they use it to drive.
Yeah.
So that would be your piece of advice for people when they come into that?
if you can harness that and be like, hey, they said I was crazy. I'll show them. But you kind of use all that drive to say, okay, now I'm going to really make this much better, or I'm going to do that. And then you have that satisfaction when it does finally.
Like proving yourself
when it finally does occur. Because a lot of times, it takes time. Good things take time.
The 10,000 hour rule.
Yes. Yeah. Good things take time. So
yeah, it's a wild thing, but hey, we're glad you took the time to come into the Thedaysgrimm studio.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
We hope to have you back in soon. I know Brian's itching to interview you.
Brian was upset that he wasn't gonna be here for this interview, but is there any like last minute shout outs, like any like events at USI or like publications that you have, or anything like that?
Where can people contact you?
Or just someone who helped you?
We got this, we'll be the sociology department. We've got, lots of interesting projects and presentations going on this semester at USI. And we have, some new interesting faculty who've joined us. Dr. Sizemore, who does work in the environment, sociology in the environment. And so there's all kinds of like interesting classes being offered.
Is that like the social networking of plants and how they interact with each other?
No, it's more like environment of like of environmental change, and how can we deal with some of the
like runoff into rivers,
climate change, or like in Evansville, the big one is that we're going to try to work on is
like farmer runoff.
The lead in the soil.
My grandma's house, actually, they found some lead and they had to dig up a portion of their yard and then resod it.
Yeah,
I think they're doing that like all over downtown.
They're doing it all over downtown, and that's an ongoing process. And so, we're going to be involved in like we'd like to be involved in disseminating some information on it.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, Dr. Andrew Buck, we look forward to seeing you again. This has been another thrilling episode of the Thedaysgrimm. My name is Thomas Grimm.
I'm Drew Head.
And this has been Andy Buck.
Hey, thank you.